Alright, here we are again, out on the balcony. It's nighttime, it's Saturday. It is a little bit chilly out. I do fairly acutely feel this kind of, I guess, stress on the mind and body, just getting so much out in a short period. I guess I'm just kind of recapping some feelings about this project so far. I'm extremely happy with what I've been able to express, although much of it, the sheer amount of content is pretty daunting. We're at probably 700 pages if it were a normal sized paperback. And that's this is a 24-hour mark. We're upon 24 hours right now. Yeah, it's just it's difficult but rewarding, and sometimes more than others I need to force myself even to hit the record button. As soon as I do, it's after a minute or two. Usually, if I was feeling any kind of too lazy or avoidant or uncertain, that soon seems to leave as I get into the flow a little bit. Throughout this, I've experienced different, you could say, stages or levels of flow, as well as sometimes smoking or not. Today I did smoke, for example. So I've noticed different kind of levels, I guess, of flow, you could say, and I guess it's maybe what I'm looking at is the intensity of passion, you could say. I seem to, I know, like, it seems to me like about probably 3 or 4 or 5, maybe more times throughout this. It's been 2 weeks ago since I started. I can't remember what I've talked about, except getting into a lot of the deck protocol and Portal Mountain stuff, and the setting out a strike point of this media expression, which and the strike point itself was bootstrapping the bootstrapper. So I started with the explanation, with getting into the neural OS and with getting into some protocols and setting up a sort of core contingent of protocols necessary to kind of really at the core, at the kernel of this, what I was calling in the past the human memome project, MEMONE. As a genome, it could be human memome, but to me that's I don't know. I just kind of swapped an N in there, and it sounds a bit better to me, but I don't care either way. This is a counterpart to the Human Genome Project to map out a full human genome, and then as Dawkins connected the genome and the gene and the meme as sort of counterparts of the model aspect of the holon's tendency or perspective to be mapping, to take the archetypes and whatever layer you're at, take the archetypes of that layer and put them in certain arrangements, and there you have the model for getting the next layer done. And this is the triad, the archetype model guild being the concrete narrative, the actual unfolding of said. The encounter, this is the most concrete thing that you actually encounter. So if you're looking at talking about cell structure, and then you take a cell under the microscope, we're talking about, like, let's say you take I don't know, a scraping of your own skin, and there you go, like the sample that you're investigating, that you're looking at, to exemplify that particular archetype. Maybe you're looking at the cell archetype. So in theory, it's a model of the stuff and what it does, and then the context is you just scraped this off your arm, put it under a microscope, and these are the parts of it. So that, in other words, the narrative, the change of things flowing on in your stream of consciousness through time as the memeplex cycles itself through, taking in new sense data and doing the process over and over again. Pulling up objects for our conscious awareness and arranging them together. I guess this could be said to be some more detail about the linchpin. Linchpin protocol. Yeah, it's cold out, even with my jacket on. So I don't think I'll be out too long. Maybe I got a 20 minutes, half hour in me out here. So anyways, I'm just kind of recollecting over some of the recordings that I've done here in this past 24 hours of recording. It seemed to me I hit a lot of good passion intensity, I guess, in say the last even 6 hours of that. And there's different aspects that I guess are more exciting. I think that's kind of the nature of putting things together, that when the whole picture is coming into view, like now I'm able to finally start hitting those arcs, now that I've filled out enough, and to give an idea of what context where I'm coming from, like as far as the dashboard, as far as the guild, like all this kind of stuff. I had to kind of set it up so that it's like I'm not just sitting here complaining about the world's problems. I've given the context in which arcs may be experienced that actually address those problems or those breaches of constraint that we're seeing, such as, for a quick example, environmental concerns, noticing breaches of constraint on our environment, destruction, degeneration, etc., decay, entropy. So when this arc comes up, all of this together kind of gives your mind a domain to wander through, to kind of put pieces of puzzle together and see what I'm talking about. So this is probably why a lot of the latest things that I've been talking about just have really sparked kind of like that good feeling, good flow, good passionate flow, which again, as I said, this whole time the expression has been satisfying for me to get out. I know it's all groundwork. I didn't expect it to take even half this long, honestly, to get a full patch of rubber laid down. So I talked about the church. I talked about the meta religion, and I'm trying to connect concretely here with enabling the type of thought and behavior, or showing what that's like to address issues that I'm bringing up. So I was getting into the Alphabetica stuff, And I think my kind of angle there, the latest one, aside from just trying to help develop the APS theory, was this idea of cybernetics. And so the fact is, sure, we lost control of the symbols, the externalization of memory via symbolic form in physical media, such as writing paper. So we have the alphabet. This was one of the key core technologies required for the dysmorphic state to take off on its own. That tendency that we had for holding on to tradition and having generative culture, so having a sort of social crust to our APS altogether. Yeah, so that the alphabet or externalized media technologies for the externalization of memory, whatever technology allowed us to really reflect in a permanent way outside of simply the minds of the culture, so oral tradition, the things that enabled that solidified this phase of life, you could say, where you're a child but you're growing up, and all you knew was to either obey or to break law. You never knew why the law was in place yet. And so I'm giving a reflection of spiritual degrees of coherence. This is one way I've heard them in one of the books that I have, to go from spiritual infancy to spiritual childhood. So this is reflective of guest and participant respectively. Then we have adolescence, and then we have spiritual adulthood. And these are reflecting membership and mastery respectively. So this enabled that participant it really enabled so much mass of crust to establish participation as a more foundation of society. And this is, in other words, a sort of slavery society. So where participation is kind of the unspoken goal of the so-called priest class. So that deception is built into society, into the institutions, and it has a formulation of a society that we can see in the contemporary world. This, as I've been describing, disconnection of mind and body. And this, to say metaphorically, people turn into machines, people turn into robots effectively, and in their lives they're gaining an awareness of this because the problem has become so acute because of the commodification of life. So the pain and suffering is becoming acute. The problem is becoming apparent, and this is why we need the meta-religion. We need to be able to share and discuss about this problem, the problem of embodiment, or disembodiment, I should say. The problem is disembodiment. The constraints being breached are are what I'm calling embodiment or isomorphism along of the configuration of the neural OS with the body, which, as we describe abstractly as environment, organism, neural operating system, and social operating system. And this does reflect pretty strongly the triad protocol. Archetype model guild holon. Okay, so we have this participation-based society, and it's actually a lower state of complexity in the life of the individual, so to speak. Much, if not all, of functionality of that individual is offloaded. So we have a participant society instead of a member society. And this is another way of formulating the Great Axial War. These two societies against each other. Two cultural DNAs, two memones. And interesting also to put this chronologically, the journey of increasing coherence chronologically through the life of an individual, that you would expect that not only overall through the life, through their journey, through the guild in the most general sense, do we have that guest to participant, participant to member, member to master, master to grandmaster. That's a normal progression. So it's not like you can be a member of the participant society and then one day become a member of the member society. Yeah, okay, so I probably said that in a weird way, but once you achieve membership degree of coherence, there's not an ability to unsee that because of the nature of the higher order. We're jumping up in significance along the hollow hierarchy. So it's like you can't unsee. In fact, your life, your core of your being unfolds in different way than expected. And this is the transition into adolescence or membership. And so by knowing that, we can put our own history into context, knowing it and being able to logically and rationally presume that many of our ancestors in past societies and ways of interacting, their society and their way of being was actually at least a membership, if not becoming an elder or a master, as you might say. So it's another way of framing the Great Axial War. This is essentially a state of decay, in other words. There's not as much complexity built into the society, and it's therefore not able to process nearly as much data overall because of the absolute crippling of the local interaction of each node, of each individual. The complexity of thought, of life, of being, of motion is much greatly, insanely reduced. And this is a kind of esoteric way, I guess, of describing why the problems of the Earth are not solved by force or by donating enough money to this or that cause or by changing politics, because most of it requires that this is the increase of coherence which has the ability to cause healing. You could say this is a core fundamental function. When membership is unlocked, it's almost like I think we could say a relation to that industrial age commodification of maintenance. So at that very least, to be kind of self-directed and self-guided, this requires a membership. Otherwise, unfortunately, and it's crazy to say, but the cultural void leaves us stranded, helpless in the middle of an ocean, and we don't even realize that we're in any kind of danger. Just absolute void of culture. So again, this is one of the purposes of the Human Mnemone Project, to collect this culture back together and share it and develop it. That's most very importantly to develop it together. And using a social operating system that takes the agent as primary, the individual. In other words, all your data is being processed from your own perspective in your own concrete network. And of course, your own heuristics, your own filters, full access to the data. I wanted to make a note about some thoughts I was having today about this myth or hyperstition of the Great Axial War, and the ending of the Great Axial War, the war to begin and end all wars. It seems to me to be a really interesting context and interesting myth to quickly explain or talk to people, and just help them understand the value of the meta-religion quite immediately by putting so many things into place. Almost 3 millennia ago, the world changed in a very fundamental way. The operating system of the human and the type of civilization that it was able to build, the type of society that it could build, was fundamentally changed. Not to lay blame or say whose fault. That's never the point. In my case, I hardly even want to concern over facts and exact statistics. But suffice to say, certain things, as I've just recently described, about coherence. So throughout our history, we had, through the history of the oral tradition, before this technology, which enabled this degree of externalization of memory. Before that, in the oral traditions, we had of course the same APS, the same spectacle. As far as neurological operating facilities of the neurological operating system, we had this. This is how perception works. You would see reflections of this in other animals as well, to ingrain trauma into their behavior, like for the mind making up a certain object, pulling up an object of, say, some other animal that attacks it. And so that will cause fear. Anytime that object is ever recognized again, that pathway of the neural network will trigger due to a recognition of that object. So certain symbol assemblages together forming an artifact. And that being picked up and recognized in the memeplex as a symbol. Or as a meme, rather. So we'll see reflections of this in any kind of animal that can adapt to its behavior of environments and grow up to be a pet or whatever and learn tricks, or such as in cats or dogs case. So my point is that the facilities are there. There is the APS spectacle, codependent arising. Just as the neural net recognizes certain patterns of things and learns how to react to it. So in other words, we've had this ability for a long time, and language itself is a reflection of this. We'll find that words are lining up with these object types, that these impressions into the neural network in the APS. So with language, we're creating a symbolic representation of that neural network. Which is interestingly, as is the nature of the hollow hierarchy, codependent, both ways of effect, both ways of impact. And obviously this is where we see that once we have acquired a solid APS, a solid understanding of meaning of things, and certain environments become just second nature, so to speak. Those symbols end up themselves being projected as we have expectations, and we run through these. We keep blazing over these trails of the neural net, causing deeper and deeper pattern and usages and strengthening of the connectors, the connections. And so there's this kind of back and forth effect that at first really the environment it's more of an unknown state, and there's a lot less certainty being built in, and then over time things stabilize, and our perspective from this, our perspective on the neural net, is this sense of comfort and ease, or maybe relaxation, but certainly not uncertainty or wonder. So in other words, the experience is no longer coming both from the outside world, from the, so to speak, the sequence of events experienced through time, the context through time. That no longer has such an impact on the behavior going forward. We have the crust of the neural net actually predicting and seeing all of the types, and nothing appearing to be new at all, and so going into sort of autopilot mode, which is, as described before, advantageous. You could say, I guess it probably comes down a lot to simply conserving energy. But as described before, we cannot let our guard down against nature and against life, so to speak. This crusting up is a metaphor of spiritual death, which means no sight or no vision of the journey towards increasing coherence. This is to be separate from the tree of life. And as said before, membership is the same. So I guess my interest here is applying the interest with Alphabetica is applying the model to the birth of the problem of meaning, and applying model concepts to potentially illuminate some aspects of the transition to this problem of externalized meaning. So it's an interesting moment that we have the question asked, what is justice in and of itself? And this was the unhinging of the language from its context, trying to generalize and build out this dictionary, build out the encyclopedia. And I don't have enough information to say whether or what time periods we may have seen more higher coherence types of societies. Specifically, I'm talking about membership societies. As opposed to participant societies. So in one, we're talking about sort of enlightenment or spiritual liberation or embodiment as a primary kind of goal of growing up, the rite of passage. It's gone to something that needs to be actively sort of hunted down and quashed. Yeah, like quite violently for a long time, I suppose. But again, it's not about who's responsible or holding grudges. That this is part of the sort of unconscious response, the APS response to to propaganda, I suppose. You may want to call it that. So there we have the alphabet, we have the physical representation of word. So we have the word in symbol form, physical media. And we have these proliferation of symbols, of scripts, copying of manuscripts, the ability to write something that stays the way it is, in theory or mythically for all of time. However you write or express it. This was a physical crust, which feeding back into the system caused greater difficulties than normal in being dynamic and having a dynamic connection with society itself. We had this unmooring of mind from body. So this participant civilization is established. So that externalization of symbol and meaning became complex enough that our whole inner realm could be virtually recreated and taken care of its enough complexity to reflect this agent code, whereby one interacts with the outside, the social, the state. Yeah, I seem to be getting tired. Probably had enough for one day. Probably relax. It's just tough that I feel that I'm so close right now. When I try winding up my enthusiasm and get going again, I just feel this dragging on me as well. Like, it's hard to force creativity. It's hard to stay in such a meditative, almost like a trance, this meditative, I guess you could call it a high flow state or a channeling state. Yeah, I'm just kind of burning out. As far as this current stretch of expression goes, do I really have much more to say? Yes. What else did I want to get into? So I just wanted to wrap up the significance with Alphabetica, get into a bit of the topic of cybernetics and cybernetics of cybernetics, or is called second order. So like that's partly the question of how to set up cybernetic systems. So it's this acknowledgement that there is no black box that would be first order cybernetics, that a system can just be taken on its own. Of course it cannot. Everything is interconnected as we found in cybernetics, and this is kind of the turnaround of I think science, or part of the recent like awakening of science, to say that to break this taboo, which is very telling that it's a taboo in science to ever account for the observer in an experiment. In other words, you're trying to make things and pretend that you're completely impartial and completely disconnected as any kind of contaminant to the process. In other words, your experiment itself is a purely objective, and the results are complete objective fact, etc. And so this is just the way that science has been doing for very long, and it can't avoid that, I guess, with all kinds of like recent awakening of psychology to the body, I guess, and even in sciences like where we have cybernetics. I think like third order cybernetics has been described as like changing of the system through time, of the system itself being dynamic over time, and this kind of speaks to a maintenance sort of aspect. The concept, the mimetic, the dynamic between abstract and concrete, gone over at length. And then I think fourth order cybernetics could be described or seen as a parallel of the to the holon slot of the triad protocol. And so this is where this is where the whole thing is really starting to self-reference in its own in its context. Like, in other words, there's a kind of guidance or a flow, and this is related as well to the journey of increasing coherence. Yeah, and there may or may not be a fifth order cybernetics. I just hadn't studied any of the material enough of what's out there, what's describing fourth, to know if that includes fifth or if there should be. So whether there's any distinction again of having not only the your journey of increasing coherence, but the presumed journey along all life forms towards that, whether no matter what state they're in or even what states of hell cycles that they're looping through, that all life has this direction to it and this interaction ability between those different, I guess, locuses of, you would maybe call it, of consciousness, of conscious awareness. So that's why I chalked it up to fifth order cybernetics, just to make sure that couldn't be defeated. So what left did I have for Alphabetica? I wanted to just talk about cybernetics. I think there are a couple interesting parts of that. One is the history in the Great Axial War and how this is kind of like marking part of the turning point from the war going cold to hot. So we are now entering the hot phase, the hot stage of the Great Axial War. And this is where we have the sort of the battle coming out in the open, as between the membership coherence society trying to emerge back out of the high entropy, low order state of the participant society, coherence society. So this is where language needs to change. The acknowledgement of the meta religion. That, in other words, this sort of ability to have solidarity and unity among your fellow brothers and sisters of this earth, and to stop dividing each other in all the ways that we think we can divide each other, and start treating each other as both guest and master. So this is the tough challenge, because you have all kinds of institutions that are going to come out as openly satanic, so to speak, and this is just I suppose what we could expect as natural that the culture has tried to shift towards evil. Even the representations no longer that hypocritical mask worn by GovCorp to pretend to care. What do they call it? Dropping all pretenses. So that's one interesting part. Of the relevance of cybernetics is its historical value, I guess, put in context of the Great Axial War. The other is that our as described earlier, the processes in the neural operating system do follow this sort of general systems theory behavior, where we have constraints not to be breached and we have protocols, and these are expressed in general terms, which have to be properly loaded into a program in order to have its context handled correctly. So we're already. So this is the reason why cybernetic systems have been pointed towards the observer as well as being a participant, because this is our symbols outside in our environment reflecting the inner. So we've been able to do this a long time ago to create conceptions and abstractions and whatever, and record them on external memory. And or in our society in form of like story or poem, whatever, has had to have structures. Whatever the way that this type of systems thinking and abstract thinking is just a part of how perception works. So therefore, we take cybernetic concepts, and which is generally like having feedback in the system, and of course we account for this in the model. In the guild, there is the feedback protocol. Yeah, that's spelling out or the program, the feedback observation tracking program. Or however Zhenya wants to correct the technicality of. So cybernetics is interesting in that we have to account for this complexity of the observer. And so the dashboard certainly does. And it's just an isomorphic reflection, same as how we've been doing models before in the past. So this is one of the keys, is to be able to maintain that feedback, and feedback is potentially a two-way operation when we're talking about the codependent arising between the neurological and sociological operating systems. So if what we're doing and participating in and what we know how to do does not take our feedback into account, so as an externalized social system, so in other words an organ which has been externalized, if it has been harvested, this means that there's been nothing left for you to use to have a significant input in that. So this happens all across our economy of needs, by which our body is constrained. So this is kind of one of the conclusions for Alphabetica, just from my perspective. Like, yes, we know this externalization happened. We know that it was in concert with a fundamental shift of how the individual operated and how society operated, and in a general way of explaining the total commodification of life, what we have is the harvesting of all the organs, whereby society would, in the past, say on a small scale tribe, you may have specialties still, and you kind of do your specialty, but you're close enough to all the work being done that you really know what's going on in your tribe, and you know as well as others how to judge a good product from a bad product, and how to do general things like that. You're raised up for this to be able to take care of yourself and to start knowing how to take care of the body, the whole body, not just your little slice of it exclusively. And so it's natural and normal to have your organs externalized. Not all of them, of course. Like, we need to have, just even basic hygiene, nutrition, fitness, rest, focus. These are things that give a straight example of how we do still need to keep some of our organs internalized, and as much as we can to depend on ourselves. But it's everywhere. I mean, some of us may not even have basic knowledge that, I suppose, baking soda can be used in place of toothpaste as more effective than just the bristles, I suppose. Information like that may not be known. It's just an example of pure ignorance, even if you have supplies and have capacity and body strength to do things. Just this complete void of knowledge of how to do things. If any particular externalized organ, especially which has been harvested, if they fail on you, if the mediation fails, which of course we have no control of and we have no business in. So this is just the fragile state of the I guess you could call us post-human already, just because of this feature of basically having a completely disconnected mind and body. Being practically completely helpless without our metaphorical feeding tubes. Just writhing like a dead worm, a worm about to die and baking in the sun. Nowhere to go but pavement. And I think that we definitely are aware of this kind of stuff, but it's not considered any kind of a problem or issue. That's a sort of dissonance, that cognitive dissonance, even though we know that that someday products aren't there, or something happens, or there's an emergency or whatever. We kind of have a pretty good ability to just ignore that and stack up the anxiety. I guess that's how we pay for it. Without knowing why we're anxious about things, we've just stacked up enough of things that we're no longer doing anything about, or concerned with doing anything about, or even thinking that anything can be done about. Shuffled off into the cognitive dissonance area. Ignored and defended with pain. So as I mentioned in some chat in the Alphabetica chat, just talking about cybernetics. There's kind of this side channel that has to come up, and just trying to remember how I described it. Like when you're interacting with one of your externalized organs, it could be like parts of the government, or like regarding maybe local policy in your town or law or stuff like that. Yeah, it's hard to say in words how to describe it exactly, but this sort of two-way communication channel, whereby it seems like the system itself is very much interested in taking your participation and getting to know your experience and allowing you to be a part of a sensor of the network. So in other words, to be able to deal with so much more information as a society. I guess I'm just giving one example of something that you would expect from something like a governing body. Just that ability of those who are subject to it to have access to mean something to the society as an individual. Much how we have the parallel here of embodiment we're talking about, where the body wants a say in what the mind is doing. And so we have these cases where we're overworking ourselves, working ourselves to death, causing so much stress in our trauma and relationships. And the body can say no, and I mean it can say no in healthy ways, or it can get its expression done before something has to snap, or before some kind of riot happens, or whatever, protest, or all kinds of bullshit that does nothing. There have been steam blow-off valves such as voting, and ways to make people feel like they have more control. But ultimately, they are not consulted in any way by the institutions that they are externalizing their organs to. So again, these are harvested organs, and we need to deharvest our organs. This means they can still be externalized, but we need to have some sort of relationship with that aspect of our being. And this is reminding me, or getting into a note about animism, and that sort of way of treating everything in your environment as a living process, even the food and the nature, and even the world and the planet as just something that's alive and can change over time, and in other words should be paid close attention to, and never crusted over. So this is the basic respect that you give to life and to the other, to the outside of your experience. You're giving that respect, that it's seen as alive and as something that should be respected, and that's something, importantly here, a relationship could and should and will be established with. So this is kind of what had to go with the whole organ harvesting program. That deep caring about all of life couldn't be there, and so again we're describing exactly what the membership degree of coherence is, and we are showing what is the participant equivalent. And so it's you're told certain instructions or commands regarding that. You try them out. That's the way things are done. You wait in line, then you pay for your burger, and then you eat on the provided table. So that's your interaction. That's your organ there. Your kitchen, which once was a kitchen and a stove and some a pantry. Actually, so being within the home, the house, the living, the property of the individual, the living space. So I guess that's kind of where my point was leading, that we need to de-harvest our organs and create this side channel, this side relationship, like aside from just what the economic expectation of the interaction is, what'll be given and taken and flow here and there. Aside from that, what's the not only the relationship between the two people who are talking, who are speaking, who are, one is an agent or representing certain systems or whatever, what's their relationship, but can we have an understanding towards each other, and can we properly reflect both sides of both neural and social in a way that's respective, and that can cause a flow of change, even of information, to allow both sides of that interaction to become fully part of the process, and so importantly, we have here from the perspective of the individual engaging in connecting with one of their externalized organs, do they have this sort of administrative console or action dashboard or whatever you want to call it to interact in a two-way manner with that other organization. And so I think we have a lot of fairly convincing work and expression on our hands, and of course we can keep filling out details forever and ever, but my question is what to do, and my answer is to de-harvest our organs. It's easier said than done. It takes a long time, even to do something as simple as getting your diet under control, finding healthy ingredients, finding more local ingredients. Speaking of local, I think a big part of this is that that economic interconnectivity, interdependability, whereby things are so connected and available that we don't really need to go out so far to have needs to be met, and thereby strengthen that particular community by sort of like recycling wealth amongst each other instead of having it exported with the import of products and services from far out. So we see just a general reflection in the economic world of this process. So what to do? It becomes a problem of learning how to navigate this language space of the meta-narrative, how to navigate it, and this is where the rubber is hitting the road in the actual teaching of the and guidance through the assistance with the increasing of coherence. I think we have a big problem that a lot of spiritual and religious and New Age stuff just doesn't seem appealing to people, and they don't realize that this is an all-out war that you can see. You can look at the history, you can notice your place in it, and if you want, commit yourself to achieving membership in the guild. The guild will liberate company drivers from companies like Uber. We will integrate Scepter technology, or integrate with Scepter. I wanted to talk a little bit about Scepter too. Just a quick note of the bridge between Scepter and Portal Mountain. So Scepter is where we got our model for which seemed obvious, the pragmatic triad, or the guild system itself. So just how you have the proximity guilds, natural guilds, and fundamental guilds. Just a note, I don't know exactly where in the text that was from. I think it was from the Scepter Revelation. I think it was from there. And anyway, so our work is already isomorphic with Scepter. Scepter is a technological augmentation of the neurological operating system. We were talking about an external synthetic neurological network to be able to deploy over geography, over space-time. So Scepter actually sets up that environment, the strange loop environment. So yeah. Anyways, I can probably. I just wanted to reference the strange loop of within the Scepter virtual environment having representation of the network, but it itself being a node of the network. So you have one within the other. This is how the first, they call them receptors, the initial strange loop being set up. So with it, like within the node is the network, but the network is nodes, kind of thing, or whatever. But anyway, so this is why we have the isomorphic database. This is why we've been working on the DEC protocol, in other words. Basically to run as an application that everyone can run from their own perspective on their own data, and have access to this platform of platforms, connecting. I guess you would have like kind of like apps, but of course you can easily fork them or use different versions. But you'd have an app within Holo app. Are they apps? I don't know. Anyways, you would have that running across multiple nodes, which could take care of something like the middleman, like the trust, is authenticating the trust and the network connection between the two peers, to make sure and to see how much they trust each other. And then, I mean, you could pull up drivers within that are closest to you in your trust network, not too many degrees of separation out. That would be preferred. That's again, I guess, a way to support your local network. And then aside from just ride sharing, you would have all kinds of different institutions of society that could potentially take advantage directly of this web of trust infrastructure, this offline internet, this unenclosable database in which nothing can be authoritatively done from outside to you or to your view of the data or to how you see the data in terms of like censorship or anything like that. So Portal Mountain provides the sort of, I guess, cognitive, the wetware, the biological side, the sort of the phenomenology, a framework for education, for teaching, framework for discipleship, which is a required component of the network. So you can't have Hollow. I mean, you will be able to use it without yourself being a member. Of course, you'll be interacting at a participant degree at most, and I believe we have these kind of listed out in general according to temperament, but I'm not going to get into that right now. So I think, so definitely the Hollow crew has a great deserving of props for hanging in there and continuing to work on Scepter and Holochain and the Hollow network. I guess we're almost there. It seems, but it's always seemed like we're almost there. Just right around the corner type of feeling, but I am hopeful that things can converge very quickly here, and it seems like a lot of different projects are maturing at the same time, including Portal Mountain. And so I think we definitely have an obvious mutual benefit. Yeah, that just goes completely without saying, I think, except to simply point at the details of that kind of bridge and what we offer potentially to each other. Personally, I haven't reached out to the Hollow team, and aside from speaking with Anders, I probably ask him every half year how the Hollow's doing, but I haven't personally been chatted with any of the team I think it's been at least a couple of years. But always have remained hopeful, and from our group's perspective, we remain adamant that for the dashboard program to ever work, we do absolutely need Scepter. Without it, the whole thing is useless. This is what enables us to finally go fully offline, and to not have to have a hack together network like Hollow to gateway the Hollow network and the World Wide Web as we know it. So needless to say, so many of our hopes, especially in any kind of technological domain or aspect, all those hopes rest on Scepter. So thank you all Scepter crew for your efforts, and that's about it. So I guess back to Alphabetica, the what to do about it. We have so much, I think, good history and good information all put together, as well as the model view to maybe do a bit of integration work, bit of back and forth. But I mean, to me, this whole strike point exercise is my response to the problem of meaning and especially the state of civilization being in a participant mode rather than a member type of mode. This is a huge problem. It's causing all kinds of grief, and nobody's taking responsibility or able to take responsibility for anything. We have this giant contraption which forces us on every single level, as I've described, the commodification of life. It's what you call a wicked problem. And so there is no linear explanation of the solution. That's the crazy part. Is part of the solution is simply coming online as an individual to awareness, to awakening, to be in fact reborn into a new way of living. A new way of being. So we're at an hour and a half here already tonight. I'm a little chilly. I'm hoping that I can get I don't know if I can even finish summarizing my thoughts on Alphabetica and where that's all going. To me, it seems like we've got the framework, we've got the scaffolding down. There's just a matter of filling in bits and pieces, which is just ongoing. But I think that from my perspective, we can really take meaningful action, and this has to be one of the consequences of Alphabetica, is to realize that we have lost that dynamic flow of life, and that we continue on in this crust of the APS, never having sort of transcended it and become aware of it and its functioning and its self-reference, and this communion with the body. When you have that, this is again the rubber hitting the road. This is where we need to be at. We need to learn how to share this, how to share it with others, how to talk about it, how to bring it up, how to share with your family, with your friends, how to talk in a way that respects their inner being, instead of this kind of dogmatic participatory hypocrisy which people are pissed off and annoyed the shit out of by. They want somebody to speak into their life and be able to know how to sort of reach towards them in a bidirectional relationship, as opposed to trying to dominate them with mind, much as how their own body is dominated by their own mind. This is the great schism. And if you don't know which side of that war that you're on, you're probably participating. Sorry to be harsh. But I mean, this is the way that I see it. How can we know what's wrong if we're never told, and if we never have established ways of speaking about this kind of stuff? I can't do it perfectly. I don't know how to do it. I'm just experimenting. I'm hoping that this kind of approach will be useful, that people will be able to appreciate the kind of simplicity of it and understand, by virtue of their own severe and crippling depression and or certain alienation. Could very well be, and I believe, as I've said, a tinderbox, a matchbox of just suffering waiting to just completely unravel into this pure potentiality. And then, of course, this is where we have the chaotic agent provocateur, as they say, to to wrestle in this by fear, this sort of slave relationship of the participant society. So I do think it's interesting that following Alphabetica to its understanding, to its conclusion, is synonymous with membership in the guild, and this by itself causes that self-propulsion of the spirit, which represents the movement of that membership civilization or membership society, which interestingly cannot be recognized by the participant. This is a factor of coherence protocol, which I believe I mentioned before. You can recognize those at your level, but not higher, and anybody can see theirs and below. So the Great Axial War going hot is co-arising or co-independent, I suppose you could say, with this increasing of coherence and emergence of the membership society, the re-emergence of membership society. Which interestingly can only really be recognized by the membership society, by the members, I should say. I might be back. I'm probably done for the night.